Hi, hope you're doing well. In this video today, we're going to talk about writing equations for graphs. So we've been graphing based on equations. Now we're going to look at a graph and see if we can come up with what the equation would be. Okay, so let's get right to it. So let's look at number 1. The first thing I like to ask myself is it sine or is it cosine? And the way that we know if it's sine or cosine is if we look at the midline, and in this case, the midline in all of these is going to be the x-axis, the middle of the graph. If it starts at the midline, it's sine. If it doesn't start at the midline, it's cosine. Okay, so this one does not start at the midline. This one starts at the point 0, 3. So it is a cosine. Okay, now let's ask ourselves, what is the amplitude? The amplitude is the distance from the midline to the highest point or the midline to the lowest point. So it is 3, from 0 to 3. Cosine, when it's positive, starts at the top. So this is a positive cosine. And then right here, the number in front of the x, so I'm going to put a number in front of this x, is my frequency. Frequency is how many cycles I see from 0 to 2 pi. How many cycles from 0 to 2 pi? Well, sometimes it's easy to kind of look and imagine it. I have from 0 to pi, I see one full cycle, right? Here's those 5 dots I talk about. That's one full cycle. So how many cycles would I see to 2 pi? I would see 2 cycles. And there we go. All right, let's look at the next one. So let's highlight the midline. Okay, is this sine or is it cosine? Sine starts at the midline. So this must be sine. Okay, let's ask ourselves what the amplitude is. It's going up to 3. And it's a positive sign. Positive signs look like this. If it was a negative sign, it would look like that. It would go down first. This is a positive sign. Now, how many cycles do I see from 0 to 2 pi? Well, I see one cycle up to 4 pi. Here's those 5 main dots. So I see one full cycle up to 4 pi. So I see half a cycle up to 2 pi. Okay. Let's look at another one. Sine or cosine? Sine, because it starts at the midline. Starts at the midline means it's sine. Okay, the amplitude is 2. The distance from the midline to the highest or the midline to the lowest is 2. So the answer to is what is the amplitude of this graph is 2. However, it is going down first, so it is a negative sign. Amplitude is still 2, but we need to put a negative in front to show that it's a negative sign graph. Okay, let's see how many cycles we see. Here's one cycle. And here's a second cycle. I'm seeing 2 full cycles up to pi. So if I see 2 full cycles up to pi, then to do another pi, that would bring us to 2 pi, I'm going to see 4 cycles. All right, this is a cosine because it does not start at the midline. It starts up at the highest. Okay, it is amplitude of 4, so it's 4 cosine, and it starts up high, which means it's a positive cosine. Okay, this one's might be a little trickier. So here we go. We see, I don't know, you can see it's half a cycle. Here's my 1 dot, my 2nd dot, and my 3rd dot up to 4 pi. If I were to finish this graph, I'm not going to have enough room here on my iPad, but if I were to finish this graph, it would go like that. It would take me, if it takes me up to 4 pi to finish, to start the graph, to do half the graph, it would take me up to 8 pi to finish the graph. How much of the graph do I see up to 2 pi though? Well, I'm seeing half of it up to 4 pi, so I'm only seeing a quarter of it up to 2 pi. Okay, there's another way to look at this if you want. If you like the way I showed you where you kind of just imagine it, that's good. The formula for period is 2 pi over the frequency. Okay, we can use that formula to solve for the frequency if we don't know it. If we know the period is 8 pi, we can now cross multiply and solve for the frequency. Okay. There's 4 more graphs. What I would like you to do is pause the video, try them on your own, and then unpause it, and I'll finish explaining them so you can check if you got them right or not. Okay, so here we are at number 5. Let's find the midline. All right, so this amplitude looks like it's a half. And it looks like it is a cosine because it didn't start at the midline. If it was a sine, it would start where that purple dot is, but it's not. It's starting, I'll make it red. It's starting where this red dot is. So here is 1 cycle. Okay, so we know it's y equals, it's a half is the amplitude. We know it's a cosine. Now it's a negative cosine. Negative cosines look like this. They start at the bottom. So I need to put a negative in front. And now let's see, how many cycles do we see from 0 to 2 pi? Here's 1 cycle. Here's a second cycle. And here's a third cycle. So I see 3 full cycles. That's my frequency, so that's my answer. Okay, let's look at number 6. Okay, again, this is a cosine because it does not start at the midline. It's starting down below. And since it's starting down below, it's a negative cosine. So my amplitude is 1 from the midline to the highest, or the midline to the lowest is 1. So you can put a 1 or you can not. I'll put the 1 there. Okay, now this one's a little trickier to figure out. I can't really just look from 0 to 2 pi. It's kind of hard to tell what portion of the full graph I see. So what I'm going to need to do is I'm going to need to figure out what the period is. So let's highlight 1 full cycle. Okay, 1 full cycle ends at 6 pi. So the period we know is 6 pi. Well, I know the formula for period is 2 pi over the frequency. So let's set 6 pi equal to the formula for period, just like we did on the one a couple ago. Let's cross multiply. I want to solve for frequency. And I get 1/3. That answer does make sense. It does seem like I'm seeing 1/3 of a cycle from 0 to 2 pi. Okay, let's look at number 7. Okay, this is a sine graph. It starts right at the midline. And it's in fact a negative sine graph. The amplitude is 2. So -2 sine. Now I need to figure out the frequency. How many cycles do I see from 0 to 2 pi? Well, let's see how many cycles we see here. Okay. So I see 1 cycle, 2 full cycles. So depending on the graph itself or who made the graph or what it looks like, sometimes they show you a little extra. If we stop right at pi, we're stopping right here. So this is just a little extra of the graph. You don't really need to worry about that. Sometimes that can be confusing. Okay, so I see 2 full cycles from 0 to pi, which means how many cycles would I see from 0 to 2 pi? I would see 4. If you like to do it the way I just showed you, we can look at the period. The period is pi over 2, because that's where 1 full cycle ends. And we could set that equal to the formula for period, which is 2 pi over frequency. We can cross multiply. And realize that 4 is the frequency. Okay, last one. Right. Here's my midline. It is a sine graph because it's starting at the midline. Goes up to 3. So the amplitude is 3. It's positive because it goes up first. And I'm seeing half of the cycle up to 2 pi. Okay, that's all for today. Just submit your notes that we just filled in, these 1 through 8.